The old K9 had stopped eating 3 days ago. Not refused. Stopped. There was a difference, and every officer inside the Northridge State Police Barracks could feel it pressing against the walls of the building, like cold weather settling into cracked wood. The stainless steel food bowl remained untouched beside the kennel gate, the surface of the water inside it perfectly still, except for the faint vibration caused by passing boots in the hallway. And every few hours, someone would kneel beside the dog and try again. Another gentle voice, another tired hand reaching through the bars, another failed attempt to coax life back into an animal that had once tracked fugitives through blizzards and burning summer asphalt without hesitation. But the dog never looked at them. Not once. His eyes remained fixed on the back entrance of the station. Always the same door. Always the same spot. As though somewhere in the frozen dark, beyond the parking lot, beyond the chain-link fence, beyond the drifting curtains of February snow, someone was still supposed to walk through it. Someone who never did. But what the dog did next shocked everyone. Before we start, make sure to hit like and subscribe to Kindness and Canine Legends. Where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The call came to Rowan Voss just after sunset. Not through official dispatch. Not through paperwork. A private number. An old Marine contact who now worked State Police Administration. The man's voice carried the rough exhaustion of someone who had not slept properly in days. "We got an old K9 here," he said quietly. "Nobody can reach him." Rowan stood motionless beside the sink in his apartment, while the radiator clicked softly behind him, the heat uneven and dry against the walls. His left hand tightened unconsciously around the edge of the counter until the tendons in his wrist pulled hard beneath pale skin. "What's wrong with him?" A pause. Then, "He's waiting." Rowan's jaw flexed once. The apartment remained silent, except for the low scrape of claws against hardwood. Dagger emerged slowly from the hallway. The Belgian Malinois moved without wasted motion, shoulders rolling beneath short, dark fur, one ear twitching toward Rowan's voice, while the scar along his left flank caught the weak kitchen light like an old crack in weathered leather. The dog stopped beside Rowan's leg, not touching him, close enough to feel heat. The man on the phone lowered his voice even further. The handler disappeared 6 years ago. Rowan said nothing. He still waits at the door every night. A long silence stretched between them. Then the man added something that changed the temperature in Rowan's chest instantly. "And the dog only reacts when someone mentions his handler's name." The muscles along Rowan's throat tightened. Outside the apartment window, sleet tapped softly against the glass. Dagger's nails clicked once against the floor. Rowan finally spoke. "What's the handler's name?" "Elias Mercer." The reaction beside him was immediate. Dagger's head lifted sharply. Not curiosity, recognition. A subtle shift, tiny, but real. The fur along the dog's shoulders rose just slightly before settling again. Rowan's fingers loosened from the counter edge. His breathing became shallow, because he knew that name. Not personally, not directly, but years ago, during recovery therapy for retired military K9 units, Rowan had overheard whispers about a state police handler who had vanished after refusing to surrender his dog during a departmental transfer. Most people believed the man quit. Others believed he drank himself into disappearing. Nobody knew for certain, and nobody talked about it for long. "I'll come," Rowan said. Northridge Barracks sat at the edge of a frozen highway 2 hours later, half buried beneath dirty snowbanks and wind-carved ice. The building looked older than it should have. heavy brick, narrow windows, yellow exterior lights buzzing weakly against the storm. The kind of place where silence gathered in corners. As Rowan stepped out of the truck, winter air cut across his face hard enough to sting the damaged skin near his right ear. He inhaled carefully, catching traces of diesel fuel, wet wool, road salt, stale coffee, and underneath it all, dog, old dog, stress. Dagger exited beside him immediately. No leash tension, no command needed. The Malinois stayed close to Rowan's left leg as they crossed the icy parking lot together, paws crunching softly over frozen gravel. Inside the station, conversations dimmed almost instantly. People looked at Dagger first, then Rowan, then away. A female desk sergeant approached carefully, mid-50s, tired eyes, hands clasped too tightly in front of her belt. "You're Rowan Voss?" Rowan nodded once. The woman glanced toward Dagger, and the Malinois immediately stiffened. Not aggressive. Not relaxed either. His chest expanded slowly. His ears angled back. One paw planted slightly behind the other. Ready. Always ready. "He's in the lower kennel," she said quietly. "Hasn't slept much. Barely moves unless someone opens the back hallway." Rowan tilted his head slightly. "Why the back hallway?" The woman swallowed. "We don't know." But Rowan noticed something then. The hesitation. Tiny. Almost invisible. Her fingers pressing together harder after she answered. She knew more than she wanted to say. Dagger noticed it too. The dog's nose lifted toward her sleeve briefly, before turning away. The lower kennel corridor smelled like disinfectant and old concrete. Dim fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere far deeper in the building, pipes rattled softly behind the walls. Rowan walked slowly, measured. His right shoulder brushed the painted cinder block once as he moved. Dagger remained pressed close to his left side. And then, they reached the final kennel. Atlas stood perfectly still behind the gate. The old German shepherd was enormous, despite age-hollowing parts of his frame. Gray spread heavily across his muzzle and brows. One rear leg trembled faintly beneath him from the effort of remaining upright so long. But none of that was what struck Rowan hardest. It was the eyes, locked on the steel back door at the end of the corridor. Unmoving. Unblinking. Waiting. The kennel worker whispered behind Rowan. "He does this every night." Atlas did not react. "He used to be the best tracker in the state." Nothing. "He hasn't touched food since Monday." Still nothing. Then Rowan stepped closer. Slowly. No sudden movement. No reaching hand. Just presence. Atlas's ears twitched once. That was all. Rowan crouched carefully, joints tightening from old injuries, and rested one hand lightly against the outside kennel bars. Metal cold against skin. Dagger stood completely motionless beside him. The corridor seemed to shrink around the silence. Rowan studied the old dog for several long seconds before speaking. Not loudly. Not softly. Just enough. "Elias Mercer." Atlas moved instantly. Not violently. Not wildly. But with terrifying precision. The old shepherd spun toward Rowan so fast, the chain on his collar snapped tight against the kennel ring. One step. Two. Then he froze directly in front of him, breathing hard, eyes wide. A low sound vibrated deep inside his chest. Not a growl. Not quite. Dagger stiffened beside Rowan. The fur along his spine lifted sharply. Atlas pressed closer to the bars. Closer. Closer. Until his nose touched Rowan's scarred left hand. And for the first time in days, the old canine looked away from the door, only to stare directly at Rowan Voss. At the exact same moment, Something slid from the top of the old case file resting beside the kennel wall. A photograph, bent with age, face down on the concrete floor. Rowan reached for it slowly. His fingertips brushed the paper edge, and the second he turned it over, the blood drained from his face. Because standing beside a younger Elias Mercer in that photograph was a second dog, a Belgian Malinois, with the exact same scar pattern as Dagger, and hanging from Elias Mercer's hand was Rowan's old military unit tag. Nobody in the kennel corridor moved. Not the kennel worker. Not the desk sergeant, standing farther back near the stairwell. Not even Dagger. The silence after the photograph appeared felt unnatural, as though the entire lower level of the barracks had inhaled at the same time and forgotten how to breathe again. Rowan remained crouched beside the kennel gate. The old photograph trembled faintly between his fingers. Not from fear, from pressure. His damaged hearing reduced certain sounds into dull vibrations, but at that moment he could still hear three things with brutal clarity. The fluorescent hum overhead, Atlas's ragged breathing, and the slow scrape of Dagger's nails against concrete. Once, then stillness again. Rowan lowered his eyes toward the image. The photograph was old enough for the edges to curl inward from moisture exposure. Tiny cracks split across the glossy surface. One corner had darkened with age, where fingerprints had touched it too many times over the years. Elias Mercer stood in the center. Late 30s, broad shoulders, heavy winter jacket with State Police K9 stitched above the chest. Beside him sat the Belgian Malinois, lean, sharp-faced, alert posture. And there it was, the scar, same side, same angle, a long pale line curving beneath the ribs. Rowan's pulse slowed unnaturally. Not calm, worse. That dangerous stillness that arrived before panic fully formed. His thumb moved across the bottom edge of the photograph. Touched metal, a tag chain, military issue, half hidden beneath Elias Mercer's glove. Rowan knew the shape immediately, because he used to wear one exactly like it. Same deployment unit, same overseas task force. His left hand closed hard enough around the photograph that the paper bent. The kennel worker finally whispered behind him, "What is it?" Rowan didn't answer immediately. His throat worked once. Then again. Dagger shifted closer. The Malinois pressed one shoulder lightly against Rowan's arm for less than a second before stepping back again, body rigid, eyes locked on Atlas. The old German shepherd had not moved away from the bars. Not an inch. His breathing fogged faintly through the steel gaps. His ears twitched forward every time Rowan touched the photograph. Watching. Waiting. Rowan slowly rose to his feet. His knees cracked softly from the movement. "Where did this file come from?" he asked. The desk sergeant hesitated. "That's Atlas's retirement archive." "No," Rowan said quietly. "Who brought it down here?" Another pause. Too long. The woman's jaw tightened slightly before she answered. "It was already here when my shift started. Lie. Tiny. Thin. But there." Dagger noticed it instantly. The fur along his shoulders lifted in a sharp ripple before settling again. Rowan turned the photograph over. Blank backside. Except for one thing. Indented writing. Not ink. Pressure marks. Like someone had written on a sheet above it years ago. Rowan tilted the photo beneath the fluorescent light. The grooves became visible for half a second. 3 words. He never left. The air inside the corridor seemed colder suddenly. The kennel worker took a step backward. "You sure?" Rowan's fingers brushed the letters again. Very lightly. Like touching a scar. Atlas let out a low vibration deep in his chest. Not aggressive. Urgent. The old shepherd turned his head sharply toward the back hallway door again, then back to Rowan, then the door. Again. Again. A pattern. Rowan noticed immediately. The dog wasn't staring anymore. He was indicating. His left hand tightened unconsciously. White knuckles, the same hand that once held another leash, another canine harness, another partner he could not save. His breathing shortened. The hallway suddenly felt narrower than before. Concrete walls closer, ceiling lower. Too enclosed, too tight. Dagger reacted first. The Malinois moved directly beside Rowan's left leg until their bodies nearly touched. His head stayed low, tail rigid, ears rotating toward every sound in the corridor, grounding him, keeping him anchored. Rowan swallowed hard once, then forced his focus back onto the file. Open it. The desk sergeant frowned. It's already open. No, Rowan said. The entire file. Reluctantly, she stepped forward and lifted the thick archive binder from the nearby bench. Dust shifted into the stale air as she placed it into Rowan's hands. Heavy, old paper, moisture damage. Rowan's fingers moved carefully across the edges, not because he was blind, not entirely, but because touch had become how he understood truth now. Texture, pressure, weight. People lied. Paper lied too, but not perfectly. Dagger remained beside him while Rowan slowly turned the pages. Training certifications, K-9 deployment records, commendations, search and rescue operations. Everything neat. Too neat. Then Rowan stopped. One page, different paper stock, smoother, newer, inserted later. His thumb lingered over the top corner. Who replaced this? The desk sergeant blinked. What? This page, Rowan murmured, doesn't belong. Silence. Atlas suddenly paced once inside the kennel. A sharp turn, claws scraping concrete. His body collided lightly against the gate before he steadied himself again. The old dog's eyes never left the folder. Rowan removed the page slowly. Transfer of employment status. Handler, Elias Mercer. Classification, voluntary separation. Reason for departure. Psychological fatigue. Effective immediately. Signed. Stamped. Finished. Except Rowan's jaw tightened hard. No pressure marks. No indentation. No natural pen drag across the signature line. The signature had been printed onto the page. Not written. Someone forged it. The realization settled heavily into the corridor. The desk sergeant lowered her gaze instantly. The kennel worker whispered, "Oh, God." Dagger's head turned sharply toward the upper hallway. Footsteps. Someone approaching. Slow. Measured. Atlas froze. Every muscle in the old shepherd's body locked tight at once. The approaching footsteps stopped halfway down the corridor. Nobody spoke. Then a man's voice drifted through the dim light. "You shouldn't be looking at that file." Low voice. Older. Controlled. Rowan turned carefully toward the sound. A lieutenant. Late 60s. Heavy coat. Coffee stain near the cuff. Breathing slightly uneven. But what caught Rowan's attention wasn't the man. It was Dagger. The Malinois had moved silently in front of Rowan without command. No barking. No lunging. Just a wall of muscle and stillness between Rowan and the hallway. The lieutenant's eyes flicked downward toward the dog, then toward the photograph, still clenched in Rowan's hand. And for the first time since Rowan entered the station, the man looked afraid. Tiny signs. A tightening throat. Blink rate increasing. Shoulders stiffening. Rowan sensed it immediately. "Did Elias Mercer resign?" Rowan asked. The lieutenant didn't answer. Atlas let out a deep, strained sound from inside the kennel. The old dog's body trembled with effort now, waiting. The lieutenant finally spoke. "We buried this years ago. Not closed, not resolved, buried." Rowan felt the words settle cold beneath his ribs. The corridor lights flickered once overhead, then steadied. Dagger's ears snapped toward the back hallway door again. Atlas turned too. At the exact same second, both dogs staring toward the darkness beyond the steel door. Every hair along Dagger's spine slowly rising. No movement, no sound, just stillness. Then, a single metallic click echoed faintly from somewhere beyond the hallway. Atlas lunged forward so violently the kennel gate rattled hard against its hinges. The kennel gate trembled long after Atlas stopped moving. The sound did not travel like ordinary metal. It crawled. It ran along the concrete floor, climbed the painted block walls, slipped under the fluorescent lights, and came back thinner, colder, changed by the narrowness of the corridor, until every person standing there seemed to feel it not in their ears, but behind their ribs. Atlas stood with his chest pressed against the bars. His front paws were planted wide, gray muzzle forward, lips tight, not snarling, not threatening, just fixed on the steel door at the end of the hallway with the absolute stillness of an animal whose entire body had been trained by years of work to understand one thing before any human in the room could name it. Something was on the other side. Dagger did not bark. That was what made Rowan's spine go cold. No bark, no growl, no dramatic warning. The Belgian Malinois simply lowered his head by an inch, widened his stance, and shifted his weight so his body stood between Rowan and the door. His nails pressed against the concrete. His scarred left side rose and fell once. Slow, measured, then still. Rowan could feel the air change. A draft had slipped in from somewhere beyond the back hallway, carrying with it a taste of old snow, rusted hinges, wet rubber, and something else beneath it. Paper. Mildewed paper. The kind kept in forgotten boxes. The lieutenant at the far end of the corridor did not move. His face had tightened in small increments, the way a man tries to hide fear by arranging his features into authority. His lips pressed flat, his chin lifted. His right hand drifted toward the radio, clipped to his shoulder, then stopped when Dagger's ears snapped toward the movement. "Call your dog off," the lieutenant said. Rowan did not turn toward him. "He isn't on." The lieutenant swallowed. The motion traveled visibly down his throat. "Voss, you said you buried this." No answer. Rowan's left hand tightened around the old photograph until the edges cut into the soft pad of his thumb. Atlas breathed through the bars. Short, hard, again and again. The desk sergeant whispered, "Lieutenant Kane." The old man's head turned a fraction. Not enough to face her. Enough to warn her. She stopped speaking immediately. That silence told Rowan more than any confession would have. Rank had weight in places like this. So did fear. So did favors owed across years. And somewhere beneath the official language of voluntary separation and psychological fatigue, there was a handler who had not come home, a dog who had not stopped waiting, and a file someone had altered with hands too careful to be innocent. Rowan forced himself to breathe through his nose. In, salt, concrete, dog fur, cold metal, out. His chest still felt too tight. The corridor had narrowed again in his mind, shrinking into another place made of walls and alarms and the vanished shape of a leash in his left hand. He closed his fingers harder around nothing. The knuckles paled. Dagger shifted closer. not looking back, not breaking focus, but the side of his body brushed Rowan's calf, a hard, living pressure. Enough. Rowan reached out with his free hand toward the kennel latch. The kennel worker inhaled sharply. "Sir, Atlas hasn't been out with anyone, but Elias," Rowan finished. The name changed the room again. Atlas's ears flicked backward, then forward. His body trembled once. Dagger's tail went rigid. Lieutenant Kane stepped forward. "Do not open that gate." Rowan paused, with his fingers on the latch. The metal was cold enough to sting. "Why?" "Because that dog is unstable." Atlas did not move. Not a paw. Not an inch. Rowan tilted his head slightly toward the old K9. "Unstable dogs don't wait at doors for 6 years." Kane's mouth tightened. "They do when people keep feeding the wound." "No," Rowan said. "They do when someone keeps coming back." The lieutenant's face changed. Only for a second, but Rowan caught it. A small collapse around the eyes. A flash of recognition before the mask returned. There it was. Truth had touched him, and he hated it. Rowan opened the gate. Slow. 1 inch. 2. The hinges whispered under the weight. Atlas did not rush out. That was the second thing that made everyone in the corridor go still. The old shepherd stepped forward with painful control, one paw crossing the threshold, then the next, his rear leg trembling under age and exhaustion, his body still proud, in the way working dogs remain proud, even when time has stripped the shine from their coat and softened the power in their hips. He came to Rowan first, pressed his nose against the back of Rowan's left hand. Once, then turned toward the steel door. Dagger moved at Rowan's side. 2 dogs now. One old, one scarred, both staring into the same dark hallway. Rowan followed. Behind him, the desk sergeant came too. The kennel worker stayed near the open gate. Lieutenant Kane did not move for 3 seconds. Then his boots followed. Slowly. The back hallway was worse. Narrower. Colder. Lined with old storage doors and framed commendations gone yellow behind dusty glass. Uniformed portraits watched from both walls. Men and women in pressed collars. Ceremonial smiles. Polished badges. Rowan felt Dagger's body change the moment they entered. The Malinois' shoulders tightened. His head lowered. The fur at the base of his neck lifted in a dark ridge. A uniformed trooper appeared at the far end carrying a clipboard, and Dagger stopped so suddenly Rowan nearly brushed against him. Not fear, not attack, a hard defensive lock. The trooper froze. "Don't come closer," Rowan said. The trooper obeyed. Dagger's breathing remained controlled, but his paws had spread wider on the tile, claws catching slightly against the old waxed surface. His gaze moved from the trooper's boots to his hands, then to the belt, then back to the hands, assessing, measuring, remembering through muscle. Rowan slowly lowered his left hand, not to pet, not to soothe like a child, just lowered it beside Dagger's shoulder, palm open, fingers still. Dagger's ear flicked once toward him. His body did not relax, but he did not move forward. That was enough. Atlas continued down the hallway. Not fast. Never fast. But with a certainty that made the humans behind him look clumsy and temporary. He passed 3 doors. Ignored them. Past a cabinet of expired training gear. Ignored it. Stopped at the 4th storage room. A narrow door painted the same gray as the walls. No window. No label. Atlas lifted one paw and dragged his nails once across the bottom seam. A dry, deliberate scrape. Then again. The sound ran through Rowan's teeth. The desk sergeant whispered, That's evidence overflow. Kane's voice came from behind them. It's locked. Rowan held out his hand. Key. Nobody uses that room. Key. The lieutenant did not answer. Dagger turned his head slowly toward him. No bark. No step. Just a stare. Kane's jaw shifted. The desk sergeant reached to her belt, removed a ring of keys, and placed them into Rowan's open palm. Her hand shook slightly. Third brass key, she murmured. Kane said her name once. A warning. Sergeant Bell. She did not look at him. Rowan found the key by touch. Third. Brass. Worn teeth. He slid it into the lock. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the key turned. Inside the evidence overflow room, the air was heavy with cardboard, dust, old plastic, and trapped years. Rows of shelves stood crowded with sealed boxes, some marked with case numbers, some with initials, some with nothing at all. Atlas stepped inside first. Dagger followed only after Rowan crossed the threshold. The space was too small, too enclosed. Rowan's breath shortened immediately. His right shoulder brushed a shelf. A box shifted. The sound became too loud in his damaged hearing, swelling and distorting until the room seemed to lean inward. His fingers curled, hard, left hand empty. Leash gone. Partner gone. Air gone. Dagger pressed against his leg. Firm. Unmoving. Rowan bent his head. One breath. Then another. He stayed. Atlas moved to the back corner and lowered his nose to a cardboard box with no printed label. Only black marker. Mercer. Personal effects. Rowan crouched. His hand found the lid. Dust coated his fingertips. Kane spoke from the doorway. That box was inventoried. Rowan lifted the lid. By who? Kane said nothing. Inside lay a folded state police jacket, a cracked leather glove, an old whistle on a cord, and a training log wrapped in plastic. Rowan removed the log. Atlas stepped closer. His nose touched the plastic. A tremor moved through the old dog's front legs. Rowan opened the log carefully. Pages, dates, commands, weather notes, training scores, Atlas's weight, Atlas's feeding schedule, Atlas's recovery notes after long searches, a handler's handwriting, precise, patient, alive. Then Rowan reached the final week. 1 page had been cut out, not torn, cut, clean line, razor, straight. Dagger's nose moved along the spine of the notebook. He stopped at the missing page, sniffed once. Then his head lifted toward the shelf above Rowan. Rowan followed the movement with his hand. Cardboard, tape, another box, labeled only, discarded forms. He pulled it down. The bottom sagged with paper. Sergeant Bell helped lower it to the floor. Inside were blank reports, outdated forms, water-damaged envelopes, and one folded sheet stuck beneath the inner flap. Rowan slid it free. The paper was thin, older than the forged resignation page. Real ink. Deep pressure marks. A final assignment log. Elias Mercer's name at the top. Atlas listed beneath. Destination. Rural Substation 9. Purpose. Internal Audit Escort. Supervisor. Lieutenant Harold Kane. Sergeant Bell stopped breathing for a second. Kane's boots shifted in the doorway. Small sound. Huge meaning. Rowan turned his face toward him. You were the last supervisor to sign him out. Kane's lips parted. No words came. Atlas suddenly moved. He pushed past Rowan, past Dagger, and went rigid at the back wall of the evidence room. his nose pressed against a narrow metal vent near the floor. Then he scratched once at the concrete beneath it. Not frantic, exact. A signal. Rowan knelt beside him and touched the floor. There, hidden under years of dust, was a small rectangular outline. Tape residue. Something had been removed. Recently. Dagger lowered his head beside Atlas. Both dogs inhaled at the same time. Both froze. Rowan felt the temperature inside the room drop through him. Sergeant Bell whispered, "What was there?" Kane answered before he could stop himself. The rest of the log. Nobody spoke. The lieutenant's face went gray. He had said too much. And from somewhere beyond the back hallway, behind the steel door Atlas had watched for nights, came another sound. Not a click this time. A slow scrape, like a key being pulled across metal. The scrape behind the steel door ended before anyone could name it. That made it worse. A sound with a source could be challenged. A sound that vanished became part of the building. It slipped into the old concrete, hid behind the storage shelves, settled beneath the dust on Elias Mercer's personal effects, and left every living body inside the evidence room listening too hard. Rowan remained crouched beside the vent. His fingertips rested on the rectangular patch of floor where tape residue still clung to the concrete in a faint, dirty outline. Something had been hidden there. Something had been removed. Recently. Not 6 years ago. Not by accident. The skin across the back of his neck tightened. Dagger stood so close that Rowan could feel the heat coming from the Malinois' chest. The dog's head was low, ears forward, mouth closed. No sound came from him. His breathing had become nearly invisible. Atlas stayed beside the vent. The old shepherd's nose touched the metal slats once more. Then he turned, slowly, painfully, not toward Kane, not toward Sergeant Bell, toward the hallway, toward the door, toward the place he had watched night after night while everyone around him mistook loyalty for grief. Rowan rose. His knees protested. His left hand opened and closed once. Empty. Still empty. But Dagger moved with him. Left side. Always left. The lieutenant's voice came rough from the doorway. This has gone far enough. Rowan faced him. The old man looked smaller now inside his coat, his authority fraying at the cuffs, his eyes moving too quickly between the dogs, the box, the missing page, and Sergeant Bell's expression. "No," Rowan said. "It went too far 6 years ago." Kane's jaw worked. "You don't understand what you're digging into. Then start explaining." No answer. Only that swallow again. Heavy. Dry. Sergeant Bell stepped forward, and something inside her seemed to have crossed a line she could not uncross. "Lieutenant," she said quietly, "what happened to Mercer?" Kane did not look at her. That was answer enough. Atlas suddenly moved past them all, out of the evidence room, into the back hallway, straight to the steel door. He stopped there, lifted his nose to the lower seam, and inhaled. One long pull of air. Then his body changed. His tail lifted slightly. His ears sharpened. His trembling rear leg steadied for one impossible second. Rowan knew that posture. Recognition. Not memory. Recognition. Someone had been there. Someone Atlas knew. But when Sergeant Bell unlocked the steel door and pulled it open, only winter waited on the other side. A narrow service exit led to the rear lot, where snow had drifted against old tire stops and the chain-link fence rattled softly in the wind. Security lights spread weak yellow over the ground. Beyond the fence, dark woods leaned close to the station. Atlas stepped out first. Dagger followed, scanning. Rowan came last, cold air striking his face so sharply that his damaged ear burned. "Tracks," Sergeant Bell whispered. Rowan lowered his head. He could not see them clearly, but he smelled disturbed snow, wet rubber, old leather. The faint trace of human presence dragged thin across the wind. Dagger found it too. The Malinois moved 3 steps forward, nose low, then stopped near the fence. A gate stood there, padlocked, but the snow beneath it had been recently disturbed. Atlas pressed his nose to the gap under the gate and released one strained breath through his muzzle. Kane spoke behind them. "Too fast. Maintenance uses that access." Sergeant Bell looked at him. "In a storm?" He said nothing. Rowan crouched beside the gate and reached through the chain link until his fingertips found the lower bar. Cold metal, flaking paint. Then something tied beneath it. A strip of leather, thin, weathered, broken from something larger. Dagger's nose touched Rowan's wrist. Atlas made a low, rough sound. Rowan held the strip closer. His thumb found old, embossed letters. Not complete. Only fragments. E. M. And beneath them, almost scraped away, a second marking. K. 9. Atlas. Rowan's chest tightened. "He came back through here," Sergeant Bell whispered. Rowan closed his fingers around the leather. "Or someone wanted us to know he tried." The last training ground sat 11 miles north of the barracks, beyond a state service road where the forest opened into a wide dead field ringed by broken fencing and winter-stripped pines. By daylight, it might have looked ordinary. At night, under a low ceiling of clouds, it felt abandoned by time. Old agility ramps stood half buried in snow. A collapsed search tunnel lay on its side like a forgotten culvert. Wooden scent boxes dotted the field in uneven lines. At the far end, a rusted sign still read, "State Police K. 9, Field Authorized Personnel Only." Sergeant Bell parked near the entrance. Kane had not come. That choice said plenty. "He ordered me not to leave the barracks," Bell said, hands still on the wheel. Rowan opened the passenger door. "And you listened?" Her mouth tightened. "Not well." Dagger stepped down into the snow, his paws sinking lightly into the crusted surface. Atlas needed more time. The old shepherd lowered himself carefully from the rear compartment, one leg trembling, then steadied when his paws touched the ground. For a moment, he simply stood there. Wind moved through his graying coat. His nose lifted. The field seemed to enter him through scent alone. Then he walked, not aimlessly, not searching, following something old enough to have become part of his body. Rowan kept one hand near Dagger's harness, but did not grip it. The open field should have helped his breathing, yet the place carried another kind of pressure. Too many echoes lived here, commands once given, leashes once held, men and dogs once whole beneath a winter sky. Dagger moved at Rowan's left, close, steady. When Rowan's boot slipped on buried ice, the Malinois leaned in just enough to correct his balance. Atlas led them toward the far end of the field, past the old scent boxes, and toward a low wooden platform used for obedience drills. There, he stopped. He lowered his head, pushed snow aside with his muzzle, once, twice. Then he began scraping with one paw, slowly at first, then harder. Snow scattered. Frozen grass appeared beneath. Sergeant Bell knelt and helped clear the patch. Her gloved hand struck something stiff. Leather. Rowan reached down. Together they pulled it free. An old lead, cracked by cold, darkened by years underground. The brass clip was green with corrosion. but the handle had been wrapped in tape, and beneath the tape, pressed deep into the leather, were initials. E.M. Elias Mercer. Rowan turned it over. His thumb found another mark. Not initials this time. A name. Almost scratched away. Not Atlas. Not Mercer. The letters were faint, jagged, damaged by time. Dag. Rowan stopped breathing. Dagger lowered his head toward the lead. His nose hovered above it. He did not touch it. The fur along his spine lifted slowly, vertebra by vertebra, until the ridge stood dark against the snow light. Sergeant Bell stared. "Is that?" Rowan did not answer. His left hand had closed again, hard around the leather, so hard the old material creaked. Atlas stepped closer to Dagger. The old shepherd sniffed once near the scar along the Malinois' left side. Dagger froze. Every muscle locked. No growl, no snap. Only stillness. Atlas withdrew immediately, then turned toward the platform. On the side of the wood, half hidden beneath ice, were carved tally marks. 7 vertical lines, then a gap, then 3 more. Bell brushed snow away. Training repetitions? Rowan touched the marks. No. His voice came lower. These are visits. Bell's eyes moved toward him. How do you know? Rowan's thumb rested over the gap between the 7th and 8th line. Because whoever carved them came here more than once. Same height, same angle, same hand. He moved to the final mark. This one's newer. Wind crossed the field, cold enough to make the skin at Rowan's jaw tighten. Dagger suddenly turned toward the tree line. Atlas did too, both dogs looking at the same place. Between 2 pines at the north edge of the field stood a small wooden shed, nearly swallowed by brush and snow. Its door hung crooked, but not open, closed from the inside. Sergeant Bell's hand drifted toward her flashlight. Rowan shook his head once. No sudden light. She stopped. The field went still around them. Rowan could feel each second stretching. 1. His breath formed pale vapor. 2. Dagger's claws pressed into frozen soil beneath the snow. 3. Atlas's old chest rose. 4. The shed door moved. Barely. 5. A narrow line of darkness appeared between the door and frame. No one spoke. No one stepped forward. Rowan's pulse beat once in his throat. Dagger lowered his body. Atlas leaned forward. The old leather lead hung from Rowan's hand, like something pulled out of a grave that was never a grave. Then a voice came from inside the shed. Hoarse. Small. Almost broken by disuse. Atlas? The old shepherd moved before anyone could stop him. Not fast. Not strong. But with everything left in him. 1 step, then another, then another. Across the snow, toward the shed, toward the voice, toward the handler who had never come back. Atlas stopped 10 feet from the shed, not because the voice had frightened him, because his body could not decide whether to run or break. The old shepherd's front legs stiffened in the snow, his head lifted, ears trembling forward, chest working hard beneath a coat silvered by age and winter. His mouth opened once, but no bark came out. Only a rough breath, a sound dragged up from somewhere deep and old. Dagger remained beside Rowan. Low, rigid, watching the shed. Rowan did not move. His left hand tightened around the cracked leather lead until the frozen edge cut into his palm. The name scratched into it, pressed against his skin. Dag. Not enough to be proof. Too much to ignore. Sergeant Bell stood a few steps behind him, one hand hovering near her belt, the other curled near her chest, as if she had forgotten what to do with it. The shed door opened another inch, then 2. A woman stepped out. Not Elias Mercer. A woman. She was in her late 50s, maybe early 60s, wrapped in a dark winter coat too large for her narrow frame. Gray hair tucked beneath a wool cap. One gloved hand gripped the doorframe. The other held a ring of old brass keys. Atlas released a sound that made Rowan's throat tighten. The old dog moved forward, one step, then stopped again. The woman sank slowly to her knees in the snow. "Easy, boy," she whispered. "Easy." Atlas approached her with trembling restraint, as if some part of his training still held him back from collapsing into the moment. His nose touched her sleeve, then her collar, then her gloved hands. The keys shook. The woman closed her eyes. Her mouth pulled tight, but she did not cry loudly. She only bent forward until her forehead almost touched Atlas's graying muzzle. "I know," she breathed. "I know you waited." Rowan's jaw flexed. "Who are you?" The woman opened her eyes. They were red-rimmed, exhausted, sharp. "Mara Holt," she said. "I ran the kennels before they made sure I didn't." Sergeant Bell inhaled softly. "I know that name." Mara looked toward her. "You should. I trained half the handlers who trained you people how not to get bitten." Dagger's ears flicked at her voice. Not alarm. Recognition of tone. Kennel authority. Old command without force. Mara's eyes dropped to him. Her face changed. Small. Fast. Pain moving across bone. "Well," she whispered, "so he did survive." Rowan went still. The cold seemed to vanish from his skin. "What did you say?" Mara's gaze stayed on Dagger's scarred side. "That dog wasn't supposed to make it out of the paperwork." Dagger's body stiffened. Rowan stepped half an inch forward. Dagger matched him immediately. "What paperwork?" Mara looked at the leather lead in Rowan's hand, then at Atlas, then back to the shed, as though the trees themselves might be listening. "Not here." Sergeant Bell's voice sharpened. "Mara, where is Elias Mercer?" The woman's hand closed around the keys, her knuckles pressed white beneath the glove. "Alive the last time I saw him." Atlas's head lifted sharply at the name. Mara's mouth trembled once, before she controlled it. But alive doesn't always mean free. Inside the shed, the air smelled of dry wood, old canvas, cold coffee, and lamp oil. No electricity, no comfort. Just a small table, 2 folding chairs, a rusted stove, and a locked metal cabinet pushed against the back wall. Atlas entered first and went straight to an old blanket folded in the corner. He pressed his nose into it and stood there, breathing, not moving. Dagger stayed near Rowan's left leg, but his attention remained fixed on the cabinet. Mara noticed. "He remembers containers." Rowan's head turned slightly. "What?" "Dogs like him," she said. "Dogs moved off books. Dogs transferred under false retirement numbers. They remember the smell of locked things." Sergeant Bell looked sick. "False retirement numbers?" Mara set the keys on the table. They landed with a dull metallic clatter. For years, K-9s who were supposed to retire with handlers were quietly redirected. Private contracts, security firms, political favors. Some went to good homes later. Some didn't stay in the records long enough for anyone to know. Rowan's left hand opened, closed, opened again. Dagger's shoulder brushed him once. Mara watched the movement. Elias found it. The shed seemed smaller now. "He found Atlas's file first," Mara continued. "Then others. He was stubborn enough to keep copies and foolish enough to think the badge would protect him." Sergeant Bell lowered her eyes. "And Kane?" Mara's mouth tightened. Kane signed transfers he claimed he never read. Maybe that was true at first. Then money found him. Then fear kept him. Rowan placed the old lead on the table. The scratched letters faced upward. Dag. Mara stared at it. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she reached into her coat and removed a small sealed envelope, yellowed with age and softened at the corners. He told me this might matter someday. Who? Elias. Rowan did not take it immediately. His fingertips hovered above the paper. Dagger's nose lifted. Atlas turned from the blanket. Mara slid the envelope closer. Inside was a photograph. Not the same one from the barracks. This one showed Elias Mercer kneeling beside Atlas at the training field. A younger Mara stood behind them. And near the edge of the frame, half blocked by Elias's arm, was a Belgian Malinois wearing a temporary training collar. The scar on the left side was fresh but cleanly healed. Rowan's breath shortened. Mara spoke quietly. Elias called him Dagger before the paperwork did. Rowan's face hardened. No. Rowan. No. The word came out flat. Too fast. Too controlled. Dagger shifted closer, his flank pressing against Rowan's leg. Mara did not push. She waited. Rowan's thumb touched the image. His damaged vision gave him only fragments, but fragments were enough. The posture, the scar, the ears, the lean shape of a dog who had belonged to a story before he belonged to Rowan. His throat worked once. What was Dagger to him? Proof, Mara said. And a promise. Rowan's hand curled slowly. Explain. Mara leaned back in the folding chair. The old wood creaked beneath her. Elias wasn't just trying to save Atlas. He was building a chain of evidence. Names, transfers, dogs reassigned under false records. Dagger was one of them. He was scheduled to disappear into a private program under a different ID. Dagger's ears angled backward. His mouth stayed closed. Still. Listening through body, not meaning. Elias intercepted the transfer, Mara said. He got Dagger out, but after that, everything accelerated. Sergeant Bell whispered, "That's why he vanished." Mara nodded once. They said he resigned. They said he broke under pressure. They said Atlas became unstable after abandonment. Clean story. Simple story. The kind people accept because it lets them sleep. Atlas stepped away from the blanket and came to Rowan. The old shepherd pressed his nose against the leather lead, then toward Dagger. Dagger did not retreat. His muscles locked hard, but he stayed. Rowan's breathing became shallow again. The walls of the shed pressed close, too close. The thought entered him with a violence that had no blood in it. Dagger had almost been taken before Rowan ever knew him. Dagger could still be taken. Records could be changed. Signatures forged. Doors locked. Names erased. A leash in the left hand could become air. Again. 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 Mara seemed to read, the tightening in his jaw, the color draining around his knuckles. "They'll offer you safety," she said. Rowan looked toward her. What? When the truth gets close enough, men like Cain don't threaten first. They offer comfort. They tell you to go home. Keep what you love. Don't make noise. Don't risk the dog. Dagger's head turned toward Rowan at the word dog. Mara's eyes softened without becoming gentle. That's how they win. Outside, wind moved across the training field. Snow scratched faintly against the shed wall. Sergeant Bell stood beside the metal cabinet. "What's in here?" Mara picked up the key ring. The reason Elias kept coming back. She unlocked the cabinet. Inside were files. Dozens. Bound with string. Protected in plastic. K-9 retirement forms. Handler complaints. Transfer orders. medical waivers, photographs, and at the very bottom, a folded map. Mara lifted it carefully and laid it open on the table. Red circles marked 3 places: North Ridge Barracks, the training field, and a rural substation marked with a number. 9. Rowan touched the circle. Substation 9. Mara nodded. That was Elias's last official assignment. Sergeant Bell leaned over the map. Internal audit escort. Mara's eyes moved to her. So you found the log, Rowan said. The page was cut out. Of course it was. What happened there? Mara's fingers rested on the edge of the map. For the first time, her voice lost some of its steadiness. Elias went there with Atlas because he believed the original transfer ledgers were hidden in that building. He planned to copy them, bring them to state oversight, and disappear only long enough to protect the dogs until the case broke open. Did he find them? Mara looked toward Atlas. The old dog stood beside the table, his nose pointed toward the map, body trembling from exhaustion and something sharper. Yes, she said, and then someone locked the story from the inside. Rowan bent closer to the map. Beside the red circle around Substation 9 was a small handwritten note. Not Mara's handwriting, not Bell's. Older, firmer. Elias Mercer's. If I don't come back, follow where Atlas waits. Rowan touched the words. The shed fell silent. Dagger pressed against his left leg. Atlas lowered himself slowly to the floor, not sleeping, not resting, only folding his worn body beneath him while keeping his eyes on the map. Mara closed the cabinet. We leave before dawn, she said. Sergeant Bell looked up. We? Mara's hand tightened around the keys. I kept the doors. I kept the copies. I kept quiet too long. Rowan lifted his head. His left hand found Dagger's harness. This time, he did not grip from fear. He held it because the truth had weight, and he would need something living beside him to carry it. Before dawn, the barracks had gone quiet in the way official buildings sometimes did when they were not asleep, only pretending. Lights still burned over desks. Radios still rested on charging docks. Coffee still sat dark and bitter in paper cups beside unfinished reports. But the human noise had thinned to whispers, shoe leather, controlled breathing, and the careful silence of people beginning to understand that a story repeated for 6 years might have been built around a lie. Rowan stood in the lower kennel again. Dagger remained at his left side. Atlas stood at the old gate, facing the same back door. But something had changed in the line of his body. He was still tired. His legs still trembled. His gray muzzle still carried the weight of too many nights without rest. But he was no longer only waiting. He was pointing. Mara Holt moved down the corridor with the key ring in her hand. The brass keys tapped softly against one another, and every time they did, Atlas's ears flicked. Sergeant Bell carried the folded map from the training shed. Rowan carried the old leather lead. Dagger carried nothing anyone could see, but his body held the room. Low head, quiet pause, scarred side near Rowan's leg. Every uniform they passed made him tighten, but he did not break position. Mara stopped at the last kennel stall. Not Atlas's, the one beside it, empty for years. This was Elias's overflow stall, she said. Bell frowned. For equipment? For things he didn't trust offices to keep safe. She crouched and brushed her gloved hand along the rear corner of the stall floor. Concrete. Drain grate. Old bedding hook. Nothing obvious. Then Atlas stepped inside. Slowly. His paws crossed the threshold, and his nose went straight to the rear left corner. Dagger followed only to the doorway. He did not enter. His claws pressed into the hallway floor. Rowan noticed. Dagger. The Malinois' ear flicked. But he stayed outside, not refusing. Reading. The stall smelled different. Not only disinfectant and dog. Old wood. Old dust. Something sealed beneath. Atlas lowered his muzzle to the corner and scratched once. Then twice. Mara slid a flat key under the edge of a floor panel Rowan had not noticed. The concrete square lifted. It was false. Beneath it lay a shallow compartment wrapped in plastic sheeting. Belle whispered, "How did no one find this?" Mara's mouth barely moved. Because no one searched for a truth they were paid not to want. Inside the compartment were three things: a service tag, a folded map, and a note. Rowan took the note first. The paper was brittle. The ink had faded, but the pressure of Elias Mercer's hand remained deep enough that Rowan could feel the words before Belle read them aloud. "If I don't come back, follow where Atlas waits." Belle's voice cracked slightly on the last word. Atlas pressed his nose to the service tag. It read, K9, Atlas, E, Mercer, Unit 9. Dagger suddenly lowered his head. His nose moved toward the compartment, but he stopped inches from the tag. His lips remained closed. His body went rigid. Mara reached deeper into the compartment and pulled out a second strip of paper. A transfer form, half burned at one edge. Not enough to destroy it. Enough to make someone believe it had been destroyed. Belle flattened it carefully against the kennel floor. Rowan heard her breath catch. "What?" he asked. Belle did not answer right away. Then she said, "Dagger's name is here." The corridor seemed to lose air. Rowan's left hand tightened around the leather lead. Belle read softly, "Temporary designation, K9 Dagger. Transfer status, diverted. Handler intervention, Mercer, Elias." Mara closed her eyes. Rowan's throat moved once. Dagger shifted closer to the doorway. Atlas turned toward him. For one suspended second, the old shepherd and the scarred Malinois stood on either side of a hidden compartment that had held both their names for 6 years. Not memory, not thought, bodies, scent, recognition written in posture. Atlas lowered his head. Dagger did not step back. That was enough. Rowan crouched slowly and touched the transfer form. His fingers found the burned edge. The paper flaked slightly beneath his skin. Someone had tried to erase Dagger before Rowan ever held his leash. Someone had tried to erase Atlas by calling his waiting instability. Someone had erased Elias by calling his disappearance resignation. Names changed. Files replaced. Doors locked. Stories cleaned. Rowan's breathing became shallow again. The kennel stall narrowed. The walls leaned. His left hand closed hard around the leather until old cracks bit into his palm. Then Dagger moved. The Malinois stepped into the stall. One paw, then another. Slow, careful. He came to Rowan's left side and stood there, shoulder pressed against him. Not soft, not comforting in any human way, just present, solid, unmoved. Rowan exhaled through his teeth. Mara watched them both. "Elias knew what they would do," she said. "He knew if he vanished, they would rewrite him first, then Atlas, then every dog in those files." Belle lifted the new map. Unlike the map from the shed, this one had more markings. 3 routes to Substation 9, 1 official road, 2 service paths, and a small hand-drawn X near the rear of the building. Belle tapped it. "What's this?" Mara leaned closer. Her face changed. "The records vault." Rowan turned slightly. "At the substation?" Old rural substations had evidence cages and document rooms before everything went digital. If Elias found original ledgers, that's where they would have been. Belle's eyes scanned the map. There's a note. She read it. Do not enter through front. Cameras dead by design. Trust the west door only if Atlas refuses east. Atlas lifted his head at his name. Rowan absorbed the words slowly. Cameras dead by design, he repeated. Mara nodded. A place built for deniability. The old shepherd suddenly turned toward the back door again. This time, he did not stare. He walked, painfully, deliberately, to the door, then looked back once. Dagger followed his movement with a fixed gaze. Belle folded the map. We should call state oversight before we go. Mara shook her head. Elias tried. Belle's jaw tightened. Then federal? Maybe, Mara said, after we know what is still there. Right now we have fragments, copies, and a dog pointing at a door. Rowan stood. His hand rested lightly on Dagger's harness. Sometimes that's enough. No one argued. Outside, morning had not yet broken. The rear lot lay under gray pre-dawn snow, and beyond the fence the service path disappeared into pines. Atlas stepped out into the cold. His body shook, once from the wind, then steadied. Mara unlocked the gate beneath the chain-link fence. Same gate. Same disturbed snow. Same route Elias may have used when he came back unseen. Rowan paused at the threshold. For a moment, his hand drifted to the military tag beneath his shirt, the one Elias had somehow held in that impossible photograph. The tag felt warm from his skin, a piece of a past he thought belonged only to him. Now it had become evidence in another man's disappearance. Dagger stood close. Atlas waited ahead. Belle and Mara moved toward the vehicles. Rowan looked into the narrow service path, where snow bent beneath branches and the dark trees seemed to hold their breath. He felt the old fear rise again, not of what waited at Substation 9, of what truth might cost. Dagger could be named in those files. Dagger could be claimed. Dagger could be turned from living partner into disputed property with one forged page and the wrong signature. His left hand tightened. Then Dagger leaned against him once. Hard. Brief. Enough to pull Rowan back into the cold morning. Rowan lowered his hand and found the dog's shoulder. I know, he said quietly. The Malinois' ear flicked. No answer. No need. They moved together through the gate. Behind them, Northridge Barracks remained lit against the dark. Ahead, Substation 9 waited in a part of the county where roads narrowed, trees thickened, and old records could disappear for years without ever truly dying. Substation 9 did not appear on the first road sign, or the second. By the time Sergeant Bell turned off the county highway and onto a narrow service road, the world outside the windshield had changed from gray morning into something older and more isolated. A stretch of northern woodland where snow clung to the low branches in heavy white folds, and the road beneath the tires looked less maintained than remembered. Rowan sat in the passenger seat with one hand resting on Dagger's harness. The Malinois occupied the rear footwell behind him, close enough that Rowan could feel the dog's breathing through the seat. Atlas rode in the back of Mara's vehicle behind them. No sirens. No official convoy. No uniforms beyond Belle's coat. That mattered. Dagger had been tight since they left the barracks, his body braced against every turn, every radio crackle, every glimpse of Sergeant Bell's badge when her coat shifted open, but he had stayed quiet. No bark. No snap. Only tension. Held. Controlled. Survived. Belle slowed the vehicle. There. Rowan turned his head. He could not see the building clearly, only the shape of it against the pale smear of winter light. Low, square, built from concrete block, sitting behind a sagging fence at the edge of the trees. Forgotten place, official place, dangerous place. Mara parked behind them. The instant Atlas's door opened, the old shepherd tried to step down before Mara could guide him. His rear leg buckled slightly in the snow, but he caught himself, chest heaving once before he lifted his muzzle toward the building. Dagger exited after Rowan. He landed silently, then froze. His nose lifted. His scarred side expanded with one long breath. Rowan felt it too, not through sight, through air. The substation smelled closed. Wet concrete, rust, old paper, mice, cold wiring, and beneath everything, something that made both dogs go still. Human presence. Recent. Belle unlocked the outer gate with a bolt cutter from her trunk. The chain fell into the snow with a dull weight. No one spoke. They crossed the yard slowly. The front door stood under a shallow awning, its windows filmed with grime. An old state police emblem had faded until it looked ghost-like on the glass. Mara touched Rowan's arm lightly. Not front. Rowan nodded. West door. Atlas was already moving. Not toward the entrance. Around the side. His paws left uneven prints in the snow, each one slower than the last, but his head remained forward with unbearable certainty. The west door waited beneath a dead security camera. Belle looked up at it. Camera's dead, by design. Rowan's jaw flexed. Still true. Belle tried the handle. Locked. Mara stepped forward with the keys. For a moment, the ring trembled in her hand. Then she found a long steel key with no tag. It slid into the lock, turned. The door opened inward. Darkness breathed out. Stale, cold, thick with years. Dagger stepped in first, then stopped. His nails touched old linoleum. One paw, then another. He lowered his body, ears rotating. Atlas entered beside him. The old shepherd's head swung left, right, then fixed down the hallway. Rowan followed. The interior was colder than outside. Not in temperature alone, in absence. Desks still stood where people had left them years ago. A calendar remained on the wall, curled at the corners. Filing cabinets lined the corridor. A cracked coffee mug sat beside a dead phone. No reports, no recent logs, no official memory. Belle whispered, "This place was supposed to be cleared." Mara answered, "It was cleared of witnesses." Atlas walked to a locked cabinet near the rear hallway. He pressed his nose to the lower drawer. Dagger stood beside him and inhaled once. Then both dogs froze. Belle opened the drawer. Inside were transfer forms. Dozens. 9 names. Handler names. Retirement codes. Private destination numbers. Rowan reached in and touched the top sheet. The paper felt original. Not copied. Not cleaned. Real ink. Real pressure. A ledger someone had forgotten, hidden, or meant to recover later. Belle's voice shook as she read. Atlas, Dagger, 3 others from North Ridge, more from county units. Mara closed her eyes. Elias found them. Rowan's left hand tightened. "Where is the vault?" Atlas answered, before Mara could. He turned toward the end of the corridor. One closed door waited there. No label. No window. Dagger moved in front of Rowan. Low. Silent. Belle reached for the handle. Locked. Mara tried 3 keys. None worked. Then Atlas scratched once at the base of the door. Dagger's head snapped toward the ceiling. A sound. Tiny. Above them. Not footsteps. Not pipes. A slow shift of weight. Belle looked up. Rowan's pulse dropped into a hard, cold rhythm. Someone was in the building. No one breathed. For 5 seconds, the hallway stretched into something endless. The first second belonged to stillness. Rowan felt Dagger's body compress beside him, every muscle drawing inward, not retreating, but preparing. A living spring held under impossible restraint. Atlas stood with his nose almost touching the locked door, his old ribs moving too fast now, his paws planted as if the floor itself might try to pull the truth away from him. Belle's hand hovered near her radio but did not touch it. Mara's keys hung motionless between her fingers. The second brought detail. Dust. Rowan smelled it falling from above, shaken loose by movement hidden behind ceiling panels or old rafters. A faint, powdery dryness touched the back of his throat. His damaged ear caught only pressure, not sound, but the pressure had direction, up, ahead, waiting. The third second tightened around his chest. The hallway became too narrow. The old fear rose with no image attached to it, only the sensation of losing space, losing sound, losing the leash in his hand. His left fingers curled until they found Dagger's harness strap. The fourth second belonged to the dogs. Dagger did not bark. Atlas did not whine. Both stared upward now, one scarred and young enough to hold the line, one old and trembling, but still refusing to leave it. The fifth second ended with a click, not behind them, above them. Then the ceiling panel shifted. Dust fell. Belle whispered, "Move." The panel dropped. No body came through, only a small metal box tied with cord. It swung once, twice, then hung at eye level in the hallway. Mara's face went pale. Rowan heard the keys slip in her hand. "What is it?" he asked. Belle stepped closer, then stopped. Her voice changed. "It has Elias's name on it." The metal box hung from the ceiling by a length of old cord, turning slowly in the stale air of Substation 9. Once, twice, then still, no one reached for it. Not at first. The hallway seemed to understand the danger of hands before the people did. Dust settled on Rowan's coat sleeve, on Dagger's dark muzzle, on Atlas's graying head. The old shepherd stood beneath the dropped ceiling panel with his nose lifted, breath coming fast through his nostrils. Dagger remained in front of Rowan, body lowered, scarred side drawn tight, every line of him pointed upward and forward. Sergeant Belle stared at the box. Mara Holt had stopped breathing through her mouth. Her lips were pressed together so hard, the skin around them had gone pale. Rowan listened, not for sound, for absence. The building held too much of it. No traffic outside, no pipes clanking, no birds in the trees, no human foot shifting above them now. Whoever had lowered the box was either gone or waiting so perfectly that waiting itself became a kind of threat. Belle finally whispered, "It's not wired." Rowan turned his head slightly. "You're sure?" No visible mechanism, no battery pack, no trigger line. Mara's voice came thin. "This wasn't built to hurt us." Rowan's left hand tightened on Dagger's harness. "Then it was built to make us afraid." The words stayed in the hallway. Belle stepped closer and lifted the box carefully with both hands. The cord slipped free from the ceiling hole and fell against her sleeve. The box was small, black, dented along one corner, and wrapped with 2 bands of gray tape. Across the top, written in faded marker, was one name, Elias Mercer. Atlas made a low, strained sound. Not a bark, not a growl. A vibration that seemed to pass through his ribs before it entered the air. Mara took one step forward, then stopped. Her keys trembled once in her fist. "Open it," Rowan said. Belle's thumb found the tape edge. For 5 seconds, The whole building narrowed to that small motion. The first second was the sound of adhesive peeling away, dry and old, each tiny tear magnified by the corridor until it felt like skin being separated from truth. Rowan felt Dagger's muscles harden beneath his hand. Not pulling, not lunging, holding. The second was Atlas lowering his head, then lifting it again, unable to choose between the box and the locked vault door. His paws shifted against the linoleum, one claw caught in a crack. He corrected his balance without looking down. The third second was Mara's throat moving as she swallowed. Her face held decades in it now. Not guilt spoken aloud, but guilt stored in the small hinges of the jaw, in the eyes that would not blink. The fourth second was Rowan's chest tightening. The corridor became a memory with no image, only pressure. Walls too close, air too thin, a leash gone weightless in his left hand. His fingers flexed against Dagger's harness. The fifth second ended when the tape came free. Bell opened the box. Inside lay a cassette recorder, a folded page, and a dog tag. Not Atlas's, not Dagger's. Military. Rowan's. His body went so still that Dagger's head turned toward him. Bell looked at the tag, then at Rowan. "How is this here?" Rowan could not answer. His fingertips rose toward his own chest, where the matching tag should have rested beneath his shirt. The chain was there, warm, familiar. But the tag inside the box was older, scuffed, bent along one edge, a duplicate from a past he had never given to Elias Mercer. Mara unfolded the page with shaking hands. Her voice broke only once as she read. Rowan Voss, Marine K-9 Recovery Liaison, injured during overseas extraction, surviving handler, potential witness connection. Rowan's jaw hardened. Bell whispered, "Witness to what?" Mara looked at the recorder. Rowan said, "Play it." The old cassette clicked. Static filled the hallway. Then a man's voice emerged. Hoarse, tired, alive, in the way old recordings can make the dead and missing cruelly present. "My name is Elias Mercer. If Atlas brought you here, then I failed to come back clean." Atlas stepped forward. His nose touched the recorder. The voice continued. "They'll say I resigned. They'll say I broke. They'll say Atlas became unreliable. None of that is true." Mara shut her eyes. Bell stood rigid. Dagger's ears angled forward. "I found the ledgers at Substation 9K, 9 transfers, false retirements, private contracts. Dogs moved like inventory under names nobody would question. Atlas was next. Dagger was already marked. Rowan's breath stopped. The recorder hissed. "I diverted Dagger through a military recovery chain because one name kept appearing near protected handlers. Rowan Voss. If this reaches him, then he needs to know the dog beside him was never an accident." Rowan's left hand loosened, then tightened again. Dagger leaned into him once. Hard, brief. The recording clicked softly before continuing. "I did not abandon Atlas. I came back when I could. Back door, training field, west gate." He knew. He always knew. Atlas's front legs trembled. The old shepherd lowered himself slowly until his chest nearly touched the floor, but his eyes stayed open, fixed on the recorder. Then Elias's voice changed. Lower, urgent. "If you are inside Substation 9, do not trust the front vault. The real ledgers were moved beneath the kennel room after Kane panicked. He is not the only one. There is a second signature above him." Bell's face tightened. "A second signature?" The tape hissed. Then came 3 sharp knocks from somewhere inside the building. Not on the recorder. Real. Close. Dagger spun first. No bark. No hesitation. He moved between Rowan and the dark side corridor with such sudden force that his paws skidded once on the linoleum. Atlas struggled up. Mara grabbed the recorder. Belle drew herself toward the wall. Another knock. Closer. Then the lights went out. Darkness fell all at once. Not dimming. Not flickering. Gone. The hallway became breath, dust, and bodies. Rowan's world narrowed brutally. Sight vanished into the little darkness he already lived with. But this was different. This darkness had weight. It had walls. It had the smell of rust and closed doors and old paper disturbed by someone who had known they were coming. Dagger's harness strap filled Rowan's left hand. The dog did not move away. That saved him. Belle whispered, "Everyone down." No one needed to be told twice. A door opened somewhere ahead. Slow, careful. A blade of colder air slipped across the floor. Dagger lowered himself. Atlas made one strained sound. Mara's keys clicked once before she clenched them silent. Rowan counted his breath. 1. In through the nose. Dust. Leather. Dog. 2. Out through the teeth. 3. Dagger's shoulder under his hand. 4. Atlas breathing ahead. 5. A footstep entered the hallway, then stopped. No one spoke. The intruder did not rush. That was worse. A rushing person could be handled. A reckless person revealed shape and direction. This person moved like someone familiar with the building, familiar with fear, familiar with old corridors where records could be hidden and men could disappear without officially vanishing. Another step. Dagger's nails pressed into the floor. Rowan felt the shift through the harness. Not attack. Interception. The dog was measuring distance. Belle's radio crackled once. Too loud. A voice from it said, "Belle, respond." The intruder moved. Fast. Dagger moved faster. No barking. No impact Rowan could fully hear. Only the brutal scrape of paws, the thud of a body meeting a doorframe. Belle shouting one command, Mara gasping, Atlas struggling upright, and Rowan's hand losing the harness for half a second. Half a second. That was all. But the old terror opened beneath him. The leash gone. The partner gone. The left hand empty. Again. Rowan reached into darkness. Nothing. His fingers closed on air. His breath broke. Dagger. No answer. No bark. No sound. Only movement. Then Dagger pressed back into his hand from the left. Solid. Alive. There. Rowan's fingers sank into the harness. The world returned in pieces. Belle had pinned someone against the wall without using her weapon. Mara had found the emergency lantern in her bag and snapped it on, flooding the hallway with weak amber light. The intruder was not Kane. He was younger. Plain clothes. Maintenance jacket. Face turned away. Belle held his wrist against the wall, while he stared at Atlas with terror he could not hide. Mara's voice went flat. "Deputy Ward." The man's lips parted. "I was told to clear the place." Belle tightened her grip. "By who?" He didn't answer. Dagger stood between him and Rowan, chest rising and falling hard, but his mouth remained closed. Atlas moved forward, one painful step at a time, until he stood in front of the locked vault door. Then he scratched the base of it once. Not frantic. Exact. The same signal. Rowan turned toward Ward. "You weren't clearing the place," he said. Ward's eyes flicked to the recorder in Mara's hand. Then to the floor. Too late. Rowan heard the answer in the silence. Mara lowered the lantern. Its light caught the bottom of the vault door. There, beneath chipped paint and dust, was a narrow seam. Not the door. The floor. Belle knelt. Trap panel. Mara lifted the keys. Then Elias was right. Atlas scratched again. Dagger stood over the seam, nose low. Rowan crouched beside both dogs and placed his palm against the cold floor. Beneath it, faint but unmistakable, came the scent of paper sealed away for years. Original ledgers, names, proof, truth waiting under concrete while an old K9 waited at a door. The trap panel did not open easily. For 6 years, dust had settled into its edges, moisture had swollen the old seams, and time had pressed the hidden square of flooring so tightly into place that it seemed less like a door than a secret the building itself had learned to protect. Bell worked the pry bar beneath the narrow seam. Slow, careful, no sudden force. Ward sat against the opposite wall with his hands secured, breathing through his nose, eyes fixed on the floor as if the truth beneath it might rise up and name him too. Mara held the lantern low. Its weak amber light trembled across the linoleum, across Atlas's gray muzzle, across Dagger's scarred side, across Rowan's left hand resting open beside the hidden panel. Atlas did not move. The old shepherd stood over the seam with his front paws braced, head lowered, breath shaking through his body. Every few seconds his nose touched the edge of the panel, then lifted again, as though checking that what waited below had not vanished. Dagger stood beside Rowan. Not in front now. Beside. His shoulder pressed lightly against Rowan's knee. The contact was firm enough to keep Rowan aware of the present, but not soft enough to pretend anything about this was safe. Bell exhaled sharply. Got it. The panel lifted half an inch. A stale breath came from beneath the floor. Old paper, cold metal, dry rot, and something human. Not fresh, not dangerous. Human in the way a coat keeps the shape of shoulders after years on a hook. Mara's fingers tightened around the lantern handle. Atlas released one low sound. Rowan lowered his head. Elias was here. No one contradicted him. Bell lifted the panel fully. Beneath it was not a vault. It was a crawl space. Narrow wooden steps descended into darkness below the substation, steep enough that any person entering would have to turn sideways and trust the ground before seeing it. Dagger lowered his nose, inhaled once, then looked back toward Rowan. Atlas tried to step forward. His front paw slipped. Mara caught his collar gently. No, old man. Not first. Atlas strained once against her hand, then stopped, body trembling with frustrated restraint. Rowan touched Dagger's harness. Slow. The Malinois descended first. One step, pause. Second step, pause. No sound from below. Rowan followed, one hand against the wall, boots finding each narrow board by feel. The air grew colder with every step. The ceiling lowered. His shoulders nearly touched both sides. Too tight, too close. His breath shortened. His left hand opened in the dark. Dagger stopped immediately below him. Waited. The harness strap brushed Rowan's fingers. There. Rowan held it. He kept moving. At the bottom, the crawl space widened into a hidden room. Small, low-ceilinged, windowless, but carefully arranged. Mara came down next with the lantern. Light spread slowly over shelves, crates, a folding cot, sealed plastic bins, water jugs, notebooks, blankets, and a small desk made from plywood resting across 2 metal filing boxes. Bell whispered from the stairs, "This isn't storage." Mara's voice was barely audible. "No." Rowan stepped into the center of the room. The air touched his face like something held too long underground. On the desk lay rows of labeled envelopes. Copies, photographs, transfer ledgers, names, dates, payments routed through shell vendors, K-9 retirement statuses altered by hand. Beside them sat another cassette recorder, 3 batteries, and a stack of letters bound with blue string. Atlas reached the bottom step with Belle's help. The moment his paws touched the room, he changed. His tired body pulled forward, nose high, then low, then toward the cot. The blanket there was folded with military precision. Atlas pressed his muzzle into it and stood absolutely still. No wagging, no collapse. Just stillness, so complete that everyone else lowered their voices without meaning to. Mara covered her mouth with one hand. Rowan turned toward the desk. "What is this place?" Mara swallowed. "Elias's refuge." Belle moved closer to the files. "He lived under the substation?" "Not lived," Mara said. "Survived. Came and went. Hid what he could. Waited for the right person to find enough pieces." Rowan's fingers touched the bound letters. One envelope was marked. For Atlas, if that can mean anything. Another. For Mara. Another. For the handler who ends up with Dagger. Rowan's hand stopped. Dagger's ears flicked. The room shrank around that envelope. Mara lifted it carefully and offered it to him. Rowan did not take it for several seconds. Then he did. The paper was brittle but sealed. His thumb rested beneath his own description. The handler who ends up with Dagger. Not owner. Not officer. Not replacement. Handler. His throat tightened. He opened it. Inside was one page. Belle held the lantern closer. Rowan read slowly. By touch where ink had pressed hard. By fragments where his damaged vision caught shape. By Mara's quiet voice when the words blurred. "If this dog found you, it means someone finally made a decent decision after a long line of bad ones." Rowan's jaw flexed. Mara continued softly. "Dagger does not need saving by force. He needs someone who can stand still when the past moves through him." Dagger shifted beside Rowan. One paw, then stillness. He was marked for disappearance before he ever had a true badge. "I pulled him from the chain because Atlas taught me what loyalty costs when men start counting dogs as equipment." Atlas remained at the cot, nose pressed deep into the blanket. Do not let them turn him into property again. Rowan closed his eyes. His left hand tightened around the page, then released before damaging it. Mara stopped reading. The final line sat alone. "If you are Rowan Voss, then he is already where I hoped he would be." No one spoke. The room held that sentence like a flame cupped against wind. Dagger leaned once against Rowan's left leg. Hard. Brief. Rowan lowered his hand until his fingers touched the dog's shoulder. Not gripping. Not claiming. Only answering. Belle turned over one of the ledgers. Her face hardened. "These are enough." Mara nodded. "Enough to open the whole thing." Ward's voice drifted weakly from above. "You don't understand who signed those." Belle looked toward the stairs. "Then we'll learn." Mara had moved to the far shelf. She froze there. "Rowan." He turned. In her hand was a medical packet. Not hospital records. Field notes. Dates. Medication lists. Handwritten updates. Elias Mercer had been injured, treated quietly, moved through back channels, protected by someone outside the department. Belle stared. "He didn't die down here." Mara shook her head. "No." Atlas lifted his head from the blanket. His ears pushed forward. Mara found one final folder beneath the packet. Across the front, in Elias's handwriting, return routes. Inside were sketches of the barracks back gate, the training field shed, the west door of Substation 9, dates written beside each route. 7 visits, then a gap, then 3 more. The same tally marks from the training platform. Rowan's chest tightened. He came back. Mara nodded, tears silent on her face now. He came back to see Atlas. Belle turned the page, and then stopped. Mara pointed to the final entry. No date, only a line. Too dangerous now. Atlas still knows. Trust him. Atlas stepped away from the cot and came to Rowan. The old shepherd pressed his nose to Rowan's left hand, then to Dagger's shoulder. Dagger stiffened, but stayed. The hidden room seemed to breathe around them. And then Belle found the last envelope. It had no dust on it. None. It had been placed there recently. Her voice dropped. This wasn't here for 6 years. Mara took the envelope, opened it. Inside was a single photograph. Fresh, color, slightly bent. It showed the back door of Northridge Barracks. Snow on the ground. Atlas standing inside the kennel corridor, visible through the small glass panel. Waiting. On the back, written in a shaking hand, I tried again. Kane saw me. Tell Atlas I was close. Mara's face went white. Belle whispered, Elias is alive. Atlas turned toward the stairs. His whole body trembled. Dagger's head lifted at the same time. Both dogs staring upward. Then, from above, Ward began shouting. Not words at first. Panic. Belle ran for the stairs. Rowan followed, with Dagger. Mara helped Atlas behind them. At the top, the hallway lights had returned. Ward was staring toward the west door. His face had emptied of color. The outer door stood open. Snow blew across the floor. And lying just inside the threshold was a state police badge. Old, scratched, wrapped in blue string. Attached to it was a note. Belle picked it up. Her hand shook. She read aloud, Stop digging, or the blind Marine loses the dog too. The hallway went silent. Rowan's left hand found Dagger's harness. This time, he gripped it hard. Dagger did not move away. The note stayed in Belle's hand. Thin paper, blue string, a threat made small enough to fit between 2 fingers. But it changed the hallway more than shouting could have. Rowan stood near the west door with Dagger pressed against his left leg, the Malinois' harness tight beneath his hand, and for a moment the whole world reduced itself to one brutal possibility. They knew Dagger's value. They knew Rowan's wound. They knew exactly where to place the blade without drawing blood. Lose the dog, too. The words did not echo. They sank. Atlas stood behind Mara, trembling so hard that his collar rings gave the faintest metallic quiver. His eyes were fixed on the open door, on the snow blown across the threshold, on the place where the badge had been left. Not random. Not warning alone. A signal. Rowan forced his fingers to loosen. One by one. Dagger did not move. Belle read the note again, silently this time, and her jaw tightened until a muscle jumped near her cheek. Kane, she said. Mara shook her head. Kane is afraid. This is someone above him. Ward, still restrained against the wall, laughed once without humor. You finally understand. Belle turned toward him. Name. Ward looked at Rowan, then Dagger, then Atlas. His lips parted, closed. His throat worked. No. Belle stepped closer. You broke into a secured state facility. You interfered with evidence. You threatened a retired Marine and 2 K9s. Ward's eyes flicked toward the open door. I didn't threaten anyone. I was told to scare you out. By who? He swallowed. You don't walk away from him. Rowan spoke quietly. Elias did. Ward's face changed. A small, involuntary flinch. There. Rowan heard it before he saw it. The silence, after a name that still carried power. "Where is he?" Rowan asked. Ward breathed faster. "I don't know." Dagger's ears shifted. Atlas took one step forward. Ward pressed back against the wall. "I don't. I swear." Mara moved closer, her keys silent now in her fist. "But you know who saw him." Ward's eyes closed. For 3 seconds, he said nothing. Then, Deputy Commissioner Vale. Bell went still. Mara's face hardened. Rowan repeated the name once, committing it to wait. Vale. Ward nodded weakly. He signed the contract transfers. Kane moved the files. Elias found the original ledger and tried to take it outside. Vale made him disappear without making him dead. Mara's voice came rough. "Where?" Ward shook his head. "I only know the route. Old medical transport chain, private security safe house. Then witness custody after Elias cut a deal with federal investigators." Bell stared at him. "Federal investigators?" Ward looked at the floor. That's why Vale panicked. Elias didn't just hide. He survived long enough to talk. Atlas suddenly released a strained breath and stepped toward the open door. Not confused. Not searching. Pulling. Mara whispered, "He knows." Rowan turned toward the snow. On the threshold, beneath the thin drift, was another mark. Not a footprint. A carved line in the doorframe. Fresh. 7 vertical cuts. A gap. 3 cuts. Then one more. The tally marks. The visits. The last mark. Rowan touched it. The cut was new enough that splinters still lifted from the wood. Bell whispered, "He was here." Mara's eyes shone. Not years ago. Rowan's chest tightened. Tonight. Atlas moved through the doorway. Into the snow. Old body trembling. Nose low. Dagger followed, but stayed beside Rowan, every step controlled. Outside, the storm had thinned into pale, drifting flakes. The yard behind Substation 9 stretched toward the trees, and beyond the fence a narrow trail disappeared westward. Atlas reached the fence line and stopped at a torn strip of blue fabric tied to the wire. Mara's hand rose to her mouth. "That's Elias's field scarf." Atlas pressed his nose to it. His body shook once. Then he turned toward Rowan, not pleading, not thinking like a man, showing, pointing. The truth landed with quiet force. Atlas had not been waiting because Elias never came back. Atlas had been waiting because Elias had come back again and again. Through the back door, through the west gate, across the training field, to leave proof, to make sure one loyal dog kept the map alive. Rowan closed his hand around Dagger's harness. Elias turned Atlas into the witness no one could forge. Mara nodded slowly. And no one believed him because they called it grief. Bell looked toward the trees. "Where does this trail go?" Ward answered from the doorway, voice shaking. "Old Ranger Road, 3 miles west. There's a decommissioned radio cabin." Mara's face changed. Elias used to train there. Atlas was already moving. One step, then another. Bell grabbed the ledgers. Mara took the recorder. Rowan followed the dogs into the snow. The trail was narrow and uneven, but Atlas did not hesitate. Dagger kept to Rowan's left, steadying him whenever ice shifted underfoot. The forest closed around them with the damp scent of pine, frozen soil, and old bark. No one spoke. There was no room for words. Only breath. Snow. Pause. The long ache of a truth, finally walking toward daylight. After nearly an hour, they reached the cabin. Small, dark, half buried under snow. A single lantern glowed inside. Atlas stopped 20 feet away. His body locked. Dagger stopped too. Rowan felt the harness go still beneath his fingers. The cabin door opened. A man stood there, thin, older than the photographs, gray at the temples. One hand braced against the frame, the other pressed flat against his chest, as though holding himself together. He looked first at Atlas, not Bell, not Mara, not Rowan. Atlas. The old shepherd took one step, then another. Then his legs nearly failed. Elias Mercer came down into the snow. Slowly, carefully. He dropped to one knee before the dog reached him. Atlas pressed into him with the last strength in his body. No wild movement. No noise. Just contact. Elias buried both hands in the old shepherd's coat and lowered his forehead against Atlas's head. His shoulders shook once, then again, but he made no sound. Rowan stood still with Dagger beside him. His left hand loosened on the harness. For the first time since the note, he could breathe. Elias lifted his face. His eyes found Dagger. The Malinois stood rigid, ears forward, scar visible along his left side. Elias did not reach. He only nodded once. "You made it," he whispered. Dagger did not move toward him, did not retreat, only stood beside Rowan. Elias looked at Rowan then. "You're Voss." Rowan's jaw tightened. "You knew my name. I chose it." The words landed softly, heavily. Elias's hand remained buried in Atlas's fur. "I couldn't keep every promise," he said, "but I could send Dagger towards someone who would not let go when silence got expensive." Rowan swallowed once. Behind him, Bell clutched the ledgers. Mara held the recorder against her coat. Snow fell between all of them. Elias looked toward the files. "Vale will move before morning." Bell's face hardened. "Then we move first." Atlas stayed pressed against Elias. Dagger stayed pressed against Rowan's left leg. Two handlers. Two dogs. One truth, finally alive enough to speak. The cabin smelled of pine smoke, wet wool, old paper, and a kind of fear that had learned discipline. Elias Mercer sat at the narrow table with Atlas pressed against his leg. The old K9 had not moved away from him once. Not even when Bell spread the ledgers across the tabletop. Not even when Mara placed the cassette recorder beside them. Not even when Rowan stood near the door with Dagger at his left side, listening to Elias explain how a man could vanish without dying, how a handler could keep coming back without being allowed to come home, how loyalty could survive in secret long after institutions had rewritten it as failure. Elias looked thinner than the photographs. His cheekbones stood sharp beneath weathered skin. His hands shook slightly when they rested too long. Every few minutes, he touched Atlas's neck as if confirming the dog was still there, still warm, still real beneath his fingers. "Vale has people inside state oversight," Elias said. "Maybe not many. Enough." Bell's jaw tightened. "Federal investigators? 2 I trust. 1 I don't." Mara folded her arms tightly against her coat. "Then why come back tonight?" Elias looked down at Atlas. The old shepherd's muzzle rested across his boot. "Because Atlas stopped eating." No one spoke. Elias's throat shifted. "I had someone watching the barracks from a distance. When they told me he was at the door every night again, I knew the chain had started moving." Rowan's left hand rested lightly on Dagger's harness. "What chain?" Elias looked at him. Dagger's file was reopened. The words did not strike loudly. They arrived quietly. That made them worse. Rowan's fingers tightened before he could stop them. Dagger felt it. The Malinois shifted half a step closer, shoulder pressing into Rowan's thigh. Elias continued carefully. Vale knows Dagger is living proof of one diverted transfer. If he can classify him as disputed departmental property, he can tie you up in hearings, evaluations, custody holds. Bell said, he can't just take a dog from a civilian handler without due process. Elias's eyes moved to her. People who forge resignations don't start respecting process when cornered. The cabin seemed to shrink. Rowan tasted metal at the back of his throat. Not blood. Memory. A leash gone weightless. A kennel emptied. A name spoken in past tense by people who had already moved on. Dagger's breathing remained steady beside him. That steadiness almost hurt. Elias pushed a sealed envelope across the table. This came through Kane an hour ago. Vale wants to meet you. Rowan did not reach for it. Belle opened it instead. Her face darkened as she read. Private resolution. Return of K9 Dagger into protective administrative custody. No charges filed. No further inquiry into Northridge archival irregularities. Mara gave a humorless breath. There it is. Elias looked at Rowan. They're offering you safety. Rowan's jaw hardened. No, they're offering me a cage with softer walls. Atlas lifted his head slightly at the change in Rowan's voice. Dagger did not look away from the door. Rowan stepped toward the table. His left hand loosened from the harness, though every nerve in his body fought the release. They want me afraid enough to trade truth for possession. Elias said nothing. Rowan touched the edge of the envelope. Paper. Smooth. Official. Clean. Everything about it disgusted him. His breathing shortened. For 5 seconds, the choice opened beneath him. 1. He imagined signing nothing, walking out before dawn, taking Dagger far from Northridge, far from uniforms, far from locked rooms and forged pages. 2. He imagined the knock that would come later anyway. 3. He imagined Dagger behind another gate, listed under another code. 4. He imagined Atlas waiting until his body could not wait anymore. 5. He imagined Elias Mercer erased twice. Rowan picked up the offer, then tore it once down the middle. Not dramatic, not loud, just final. Belle exhaled. Mara closed her eyes. Elias lowered his head. Dagger's ear flicked once toward the sound of tearing paper. Rowan placed the 2 halves on the table. I'm done letting people call fear protection. Elias looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. Belle gathered the ledgers into a waterproof case. I'll contact the federal number Elias trusts. Mara lifted the recorder. And I'll send copies to 3 places before Vale can bury one. Rowan turned toward the cabin door. Outside, dawn had begun to pale the trees. Dagger stood with him. Left side, steady. Atlas remained beside Elias, but his eyes were open now, clear and fixed, as if the long wait had finally become movement. Elias rose slowly. His hand stayed on Atlas's collar. Vale won't come quietly. Rowan opened the door. Cold air entered the cabin. No, he said. But this time, neither will the truth. By sunrise, Northridge Barracks no longer looked like a place that could keep secrets. Federal vehicles lined the rear lot. Not many. Enough. Their lights did not flash. Their doors opened and closed with controlled purpose. Men and women in plain coats crossed the snow with evidence cases in their hands and clipped identification at their collars. Sergeant Bell stood beside the back entrance, speaking into a phone, her face pale from sleeplessness, but set in a way Rowan had not seen before. Not fear. Decision. Mara Holt remained near the kennel corridor, one hand resting on the old key ring, watching officers carry sealed boxes from evidence overflow, from the lower archive, from Kane's office. Kane himself sat inside a conference room with two federal investigators. He looked smaller behind glass, older, a man who had spent years mistaking silence for survival. Deputy Commissioner Vale arrived at 7:16. He came in a black sedan, clean coat, clean shoes, clean expression. But when he stepped through the rear door and saw Elias Mercer standing beside Atlas, something in his face failed. Only for half a second. Enough. Elias did not speak first. Atlas stood beside him. The old shepherd's body was tired beyond hiding now, but his head remained lifted, his graying muzzle pointed directly toward the man who had turned loyalty into paperwork. Dagger stood at Rowan's left, silent, rigid, scar visible. Vale looked at the dog, then at Rowan. There has been a misunderstanding. Rowan's left hand rested on Dagger's harness. No. One word. Flat. Final. Bell placed the ledgers on the table. Mara placed the recordings beside them. Elias placed his badge on top. Old. Scratched. Wrapped, no longer in blue string. The federal investigator opened the first ledger, then the second, then the third. Vale stopped talking. That was how justice began. Not with shouting, not with revenge, with paper that could no longer be altered, with signatures that could no longer hide, with names restored to their rightful weight. Hours passed. Statements were taken. Evidence logged. Doors opened. Files unsealed. And through all of it, Atlas remained beside Elias. Whenever Elias shifted, Atlas shifted. Whenever Elias stopped, Atlas stopped. Not young, not strong, but complete in a way no one in that building could ignore. Near noon, Elias walked into the lower kennel corridor, the same corridor where Atlas had waited, the same door, the same concrete, the same bowl still sitting beside the gate. Atlas followed him slowly. Dagger followed Rowan. At the back entrance, Elias stopped, his hand lowered to Atlas's collar. "I tried to come back," he whispered. Atlas pressed his muzzle into Elias's palm. No one interrupted. Rowan felt his throat tighten. His left hand opened. For once, it did not close around fear. Dagger leaned into his leg. Hard, brief, alive. Elias turned to Rowan. "You were afraid they'd take him." Rowan did not deny it. His jaw moved once before words came. "I still am." Elias nodded. "That fear doesn't make you weak." Atlas breathed against Elias's hand. "It means you know what he is worth." Rowan lowered his fingers to Dagger's shoulder. Not possession, not proof, promise. Outside, snow had stopped falling. Light touched the rear lot in clean, pale sheets. For the first time in years, Atlas walked through the back door with Elias beside him. Not waiting, not watching, leaving, together. Rowan stood in the doorway with Dagger at his left side, feeling cold air on his face, leather under his hand. The steady warmth of a scarred dog who had once been erased on paper and had somehow become impossible to lose in life. And as federal officers carried the last sealed box into the daylight, Rowan understood that justice did not always arrive loud. Sometimes it came on old paws. Sometimes it came through a hidden room beneath a forgotten station. Sometimes it came because one loyal dog refused to stop looking at a door.